Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Haken. I'm chair of the Roman Roads Research Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's talk. And apologies again if you struggle to get in. I think most people probably have now. All being well. Anyway, tonight's talk is going to be by Paddy Lambert, and for those who are avid followers of Digging for Britain, he will be no stranger to you, because he's been on one of the most recent episodes, I gather. I haven't seen it yet, Paddy, so I apologise for that, but I'll catch up with it in due course. But he's talking about a different site tonight, which is Prior's Hall Roman Villa, with a previously unknown bit of road that runs through it. And it's an absolutely fascinating site. As we're a bit behind, I'll dispense with most of the formalities, just to remind everybody that during the talk, if you wish to put a question, use the chat function, and those questions will then be passed on to me at the end of the talk. I'm hoping that everybody can see me properly, because I'm not coming up on my own screen, so I'm hoping it's working as it should. Anyway, so with no further ado, Paddy, are you there? I can't actually see you. For some reason, my view isn't working properly.
Paddy, sorry, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm here. Everything's working a second ago. Can everybody hear me all right?
Nope. Paddy, you're still muted.
No, it's not mute. I think maybe your microphone isn't doing what it should be. Still can't hear you.
We did actually test this about half an hour ago, and everything was working perfectly. That's sod's law.
There we go. We'll try it without my microphone for a minute. Is that okay?
Yeah, can hear you now. We'll have to go with that, I think.
Okay, we can do this for now, and then I can always plug back in later on. Plus, it's much more comfortable for me this way. So, if everyone can hear me, I'm going to share my screen now. If everyone can hear me, okay. God, it starts off really well, doesn't it? Bring back the Romans. Their technology was much better. So,
yeah, okay.
There
We've got your screen, Paddy. So
lovely stuff.
On track.
Thank goodness for that. I was worried I didn't have to do this, and then I could just sit down and go to bed. So hopefully everyone can hear me. Everyone can see the presentation in front of you. With my wonderful thing like this, but obviously do pipe up if any time I need to stop or anything else. And thank you all for coming. I think I'm kind of nervous, to be perfectly honest, because I wasn't expecting so many people. There's quite a lot of people that are interested in this kind of thing, and I'm deeply heartened to see that. And I can't wait to show you perhaps one of the best archaeological sites I've ever seen, regardless of even worked on. So for those of you that don't know me, some background I think is needed. My name is Paddy Lambert. I'm a project officer at a company called Oxford Archaeology, based at Cambridge. Weirdly, let's not get going with this. And I'm a specialist in the history and material culture of the Roman world. Especially, I love the rural landscape, because over 90% of the population lived in the rural sphere, and most of my career is spent in the field, if you like. So it's largely part down to that. And I'm going to be talking to you this evening about, like I said, one of the greatest sites I think that has been found for a few generations, simply by virtue of not necessarily what we found, but what it could mean, especially in this region. Now, of course, Roman Britain was full of regional diversity. And where I will be speaking about is Corby in Northamptonshire. So we're right in the middle of Roman Britain, essentially. And we are in the heartland, one of the industrial heartlands, and we found wonderful evidence for that. But I'm not actually going to be trying to talk about the industry too much, because there's just, as you'll probably see, there's so much to go through. So if we start with a bit of background, And if I show you a map of the region in the Roman period, so where we are here, we are at Prize Hall. Obviously, you can all probably tell I had to add this in. So we're at Prize Hall is just here, and we are, like I said, right in the middle. So Jura Brevi is about 20-ish miles to the northeast, and then we've got Leicester, or the rather lovely name Ratai, to the northwest. And this is, of course, the Gartree Road, very famous road. The 57A, Marjorie would call it, as a lovely nickname. So where we are essentially is right in the middle of Roman Britain, and it is famous for its, as it is now actually, in the Roman period, it was famous for its industrial kind of output because of the richness of natural resources around this area. So if any of you have ever visited Corby, for example, on purpose, for any reason, you'll know that it was a huge industrial place that came much to the fore, you know, in the 20th century. And it was much the same in the Roman period. So we've got Kettering just down the south. That was famous for brewing. I've done a lot of work in Kettering, and Roman brewing happened there a lot. They like to brew beer there. And you've got Laxton, which was an enormous ironworking settlement. And of course, you've got the centre of the Nene Valley pottery industry here at Jura Brevi. There's a lot of places called Jura Brevi in Roman Britain. It literally means the place by the river. Now, the Romano-British were anything if not imaginative for their road names and for their names, if you like, of places. So we have a lot to get on with. Let's not talk about this too much. So the parameters of the project. So in 2019, Oxford Archaeology East, as it was then, was called out to a new development just outside Corby called Prize Hall. Now, the Prize Hall development is for a mixed-use extension of about 5,500 new homes and lots of vernacular infrastructure to go with that, such as shops and schools and those bits and pieces. Now, we were commissioned at first to only do one area, and this is this one just here. But there were 5 planned, and the reason why we were called out to do this, because although it is the law, you know, we have to come out and do any kind of archaeological work before work starts of any kind of building. We were called out here because of a very specific reason. And that was because in 2010 and 2011, they found a Roman villa on the site. And the Roman villa is just in here. It was only evaluated, so the scope of excavation was very, very small. So they didn't quite know how big it is or anything else, but they did geophysics on the site. And I'm sure the Roman road lovers that you are have already noticed, yes, indeed, that is a Roman road coming just down here. But the Roman villa is just in this bit here. And you can see that, largely speaking, the geophysics aren't the best. And that is mostly down to the natural geology. So it's actually cornbrash. Like there's programs like Time Team and everything that always wax lyrical about geophysics. But anybody that really knows geophysics knows that largely it's kind of a coin toss whether or not it's actually supposed to work. So on here it definitely didn't, and everything we found was largely a surprise, apart from the road. But we didn't know that the road was going to be as spectacular as it was. So the Roman villa in Field 10 is just here. And you can see it's been largely translated, if you like, from the ground resistance data. But what they found was it was a Roman villa from around the end of the 1st century, which is quite rare, all the way up to the 4th century and even into the 5th, perhaps. And it had numerous bits and pieces to do with it, all of the lovely painted wall plaster and everything else. So everything else that I just want you to keep this in your mind, conceptualize this and contextualize this as much as you can, that all of this will be around this building, of which we've never excavated. So that's really interesting about Romano-British villas on the whole. For example, there are over 2,500 villas known in Britain, and yet we know next to nothing really about them. We don't know how they were built necessarily. We don't know who lived in them. We don't know what they were for, ultimately. But that's because in antiquarian archaeology, and for archaeology for much of the last couple of centuries, archaeology is mostly focused on the bits you can see. on the wonderful mosaics, on the beautiful wall plaster, the hypercourse, the literal heat from below, all of these nice accoutrements of the landscape. But that is kind of misleading, because it is within the landscape that tells us most about the villas. It's within, we don't know who built them, we don't know the people that worked in them. And I think that's really, really important, because it is like, if we just try and tell everything about the Romano-British world, if you like, or worlds, from just this bit of building, from just villas, then it is like trying to tell everybody how you live your life in the United States, for example, about looking at where Donald Trump lived. And so that could be misleading. It's probably a bad example, but that can be slightly misleading. So that's why the prize hall excavation was really, really important, because we, for a very rare example of this, we got a chance to look at a Romano-British villa from the outside looking in, and we got to actually experience the whole landscape. So I'll take you quickly and find you and tell you exactly what we found, and give you a bit of a broad tour of what we came up with. So this is actually when we first started. So the site itself, Prize Hall, you've got Rockingham Motor Speedway just here, which is doesn't really work. It's a bit of a white elephant, and I'm not really allowed to say what this is. It's the Barclays Data Centre, but you know, I can't. I could do with the rest, so please imprison me. So that's called the Barclays Data Centre. That's where everybody keeps all their bits. And there's the Prize Hall development just here. And when we first came in January 2021, is what the site looked like. So it was one hell of a challenge for sure. So when we stripped the area, it was extraordinary. It was utterly extraordinary. So you have the villa site just here. To the north of the villa, we found an extremely rare example of an enclosed settlement that immediately predated the villa. So we think that the same community lived in this settlement, and they probably built the villa in around the early 2nd century. Now, after the accession of Hadrian in 117 AD, you do see a huge construction boom, especially in the south, of masonry footed structures and villas and towns. And this is kind of falls within that. So when we found the enclosed settlement, which was forcibly closed down, we think forcibly closed down around 100 AD, and which is really exciting. But here, obviously, is where the magic is happening, because in area E over here to the northeast, we found a large stretch of road that stretched for something in the region of 350 meters that we were allowed to excavate, which was astonishing, because, as you know, we will come to, there's not much. When you do excavations on Roman roads, usually they're in very, very small microscopic vignettes when you can get to them. Whereas here we had an opportunity to study a Roman road within its landscape. And then we had an even more wonderful thing, in my opinion, is that we found the actual driveway that led to the villa itself. And we were able to reconstruct the landscape going into the villa. But perhaps the most astonishing thing actually was found, believe it or not, a year earlier, in 2019 and 2020, in this area, just here in area A. So there's the villa, that's the enclosed settlement, that's the driveway, and that's the road. Because in area A, we found an industrial complex from the later Roman period. So what happened was the villa changed its function in around 250 AD. Actually under the auspices of the Gallic Empire, if you like, and it was absolutely astonishing what we found on this site. And remember, the geophysics didn't really give us any indication that this was going to happen. And I wasn't really going to talk about this, but I'm going to share this little idiom with you. So I actually, in 2019, I didn't want to do Prize Hall because there was nothing there. So when I was asked to go and do Prize Hall, I said no, because I wanted to work on the Water Beach expansion, which is Water Beach is a new town, but it's set within the landscape of the Car Dyke. And I'm a big fan of Roman canals. I don't have many friends, so I'm a big fan of Roman canals, and I really, really wanted to do this. And my manager said to me, please go out there. It's only going to be about 6 weeks. And it's a nice bit of archaeology. You won't really find very much, and it's Roman. So you'll go out there and have a bit of fun. So I said, okay, then. I didn't know that 6 months later we were going to find this. And hopefully that is working okay for everybody, because what you're looking at is one of the rarest things we've ever seen in Roman Britain. This is an accurate photogrammetry 3D model of a Romano-British tilery. And when I say tilery, I mean it's one of the largest found in Britain. They're actually all similarly sized, but generally speaking, this is one of the largest ever found. But what's exciting about this one is it was converted out of an earlier building. And we think the earlier building, it's up in the air, but the earlier building is likely to have been a Romano-Celtic mausoleum from the earlier phase of the villa. And you can see around here, there's the interior of the tile kiln. And it is an astonishing looking thing. It's 6 months to this. And you can see that there's the curtain wall. They all follow, obviously you're all here for the roads, but I can't resist telling you a little something about this. Because you have the enclosed wall just here, and it came round this way. And they're all built, they're Romano temples and mausolea are all built generally to a type, although mausolea are far more idiosyncratic. And the Romans actually, speaking of, the Romans never called them mausolea, ever. Where we get the word monumental from. They are meant to monumentalize the memory of the dead, if you like, but only if you can, of course. So you have the curtain wall that goes around it, or the precinct, and then you have this interior building just in the middle, centrally placed. And that was where they would be kept. And it's astonishing, it really is. But of course, it was gutted out and it was changed, and it became a tilery with not just one. So you've got one tile kiln here, one tile kiln there, another tile kiln there, and another one here. And they also finished it off, if that wasn't enough, they also finished it off with a tile and pottery kiln just here. And it was astonishing. And in fact, it was so astonishing and so rare that we won an award for it, for the Current Archaeology Awards, where we won the Rescue Project of the Year in 2022, which was a really lovely thing, because, you know, all of you that have done archaeological fieldwork in February, you get to know how difficult this must have been. So this here is just the last, if you want some context for this, this is my ceramic building specialist, Ted Livermore, and he is laying on the discarded bricks from the very last firing. So that is just from the last firing. Now, it's been estimated, we think, that even just based on a small proportion of that, we think that we're able to make 25 to maybe even 50,000 tiles across its life, which is an astonishing number. Here is a lime kiln that we found by accident that was so big that we could fit my entire site team in it. And that just gives you an idea of scale of the preservation of the site as well. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of questions about that, but we've got a lot to do. So we get to the main road itself, or the Via Padicus, or the Via Padicus, if you like, that I found. And because I found it, I think that it's only fair that I'm able to name it. So I'm calling it the Via Padicus. Again, you can tell why I have no friends. And yes, of course, that is my dog. That is my dog that comes with me on all my excavations. He came with me, he's Cosmo, and he looks distinctly impressed with the road, as you can probably tell. So we get to the main road. Now in 2021, because obviously when we finished the excavation in 2019, you know, the mausoleum and the tilery is more likely, it was a tilery for longer than it was anything else. When we went back, I wasn't really filled with much optimism. I thought, you know, we're not going to find much. You can't possibly top this. In my opinion, this is actually my favorite thing I've ever worked on. And I've worked on a Spitfire. I've done all sorts of wonderful archaeology, but this is by far the best thing I've ever found. Because a small anecdote, if you like, Roman roads were the thing that got me into archaeology and made me obsessed with archaeology. For many, many years. In fact, I used to dress as a Roman a lot. I used to use a bin lid and a broom handle. I used to stomp around in the garden and pretending I was a Roman soldier, until a couple of weeks ago, my mum said, "Can you just get a real job?" So the main road on Price Hall, we excavated it in January. Let's say we started in January. So here it is, just here. And just to give you an idea where it is, and it's about 800 meters from the villa itself. And when we found it, just to give you some stats, we think it was constructed by the military community. We are very, in archaeology, we're very, very reluctant to say army unless army is absolutely what was there, because it can be a very dangerous thing to say when you say the army. Because what is the army? The Romans never had a word for army. They called them the army, the armies, you know, the exerciti, the armies. So we think that it was constructed by a military community, because this level of workmanship can only have been done by the army or the military community. And we say with local assistance, because I don't think they did a lot of the heavy lifting all on their own. So total length excavated, we excavated just under 300 meters of it. The total width of the entire road, so that's this bit just here, was 17 meters, and then it actually narrowed as it went further south. The agger survived intact pretty much in some places, just over a meter tall. So you can actually see the agate just there, and he's still on top, but where that ground is just here, you can see that's the other side. That's one of my archaeologists working in there then. The running surface now then, that changed quite a lot. You know, in the beginning, it was about 6 meters, and then it kind of averaged it out. It went to about 5 to between 5 and 5.3-ish. The agger, like I said, and then it served the villa estate for over 400 years. Now, this thing was used for a long time. It went out of use, I think, in around the end of the 5th century, perhaps. And in that time, there was a lot that went on. So you had small running repairs, and then they did a much larger scheme of repairs in the 3rd century, in line with the building of the industrial complex that you saw just a moment ago. And here it is, you can see from the drone footage. And you can also see that the road was kind of capricious. The way that they built it was they could not have chosen a worse place to build a road. So here it is. And just as an aside as well, before I forget, the actual thing across the other side, just here, the enclosed settlement I showed you, that was still there and people were still living there when this was being built. So what we have is this wonderful link with the Iron Age community, the late Iron Age community that we call it in the late 1st century, early 2nd century, that were living in this, was actually able to watch these people build this thing, and perhaps even partook in the building itself. And we do have some kind of hint that that happened. So here it is. It continued here only in the form of 2 ditches into the south of what we call Area D. But in Area E here, that's where, as we say, the magic happened. And this gives you an idea of what it looked like when we start to debate it. So you can see the camber of the agger just here. That's the natural geology, the natural level just there. You can also see the topography just there as it comes up. So they've built it across laterally, and I'll come to that in just a moment. But here it is, just there. You can see there's one of the twin ditches. There were 2, but there was one first, and then they realized that because the road was built in such a place, they needed to, and because Britain has a playful climate, should we say, that it was constructed, another one was constructed. So you've got, this is when we started to excavate it, but this just gives you an idea of the level of preservation, first and foremost, and the size of the thing. It was astonishing. So, and when we started to excavate it fully, and again, this gives you an even better indication of what it looked like on the inside. So it was tremendous. It was really hard work because we had to hand excavate a 17-meter wide section. We excavated about 6 of these across the road like this, and it was really lovely. And someone in my position, if I tell you the truth, like as a field director, that's what a project officer is. You don't really get a chance to do this very often, but it was the one thing, it was the hill I chose to die on. I had to dig some of the Roman road. And because I haven't dug for a long time, I got to about here. And because if you ever dug through a Roman road that has been subject to hundreds of years and tons of people all on it, it's incredibly compact. I'm getting incredibly old and fat now, so I can't keep doing it. So when it comes to this, if practice, it's probably better to show you in motion, and I hope this works. So I have this, and it works okay for me, so we'll see. I'm not even going to talk actually through most of it. You can see some of the wheel ruts and everything else, which I'm going to come to, but it gives you a size of its scale, because very rarely in archaeology do you actually get a real opportunity, a genuine opportunity to actually walk in their footsteps from people from the past. And the Priors Hall Road was, or rather the Weir Padicus, as I'm going to call it, was one of those sublime chances to do that. And Priors Hall Villa Estate as a whole, usually as an archaeologist, you are completely aware that you are in your modern world and that you are digging their world. But at Priors Hall Roman Villa, for the very first time in my career, from what I remember, is I felt like we were actually in their world looking out. And it was astonishing because we got some really good tangible links. So the first thing we're going to talk about, obviously, is the construction of the thing, because this is largely one of the biggest parts of it. And we found some wonderful idiosyncratic bits to how they dealt with problems as they arose. So I'm going to use Statius and Silvae. Of course, many of you are going to be aware of who Statius was. He was a poet that wrote this incredibly obsequious poem to the Emperor Domitian to commemorate the Via Domitiana in the late 1st century. And it's largely abnormal, okay? So his description is not normal. Let's not even get started on the whole Vitruvius thing of how they build roads, because that's just a load of nonsense. So for the most part, I'm going to use him because it gives us some really good, clear indicators. So here he says, here the initial work was to set up the tracks to cut back the uncultivated grounds. Now there is no evidence on Priors Hall whatsoever on this site that there was any kind of cultivation at all before the Romans arrived. So everything you see was built at the time the road was built. So what we have for that is the first thing they did, apart from all the surveying, and when they'd all finished, the agrimentals and everybody else had finished, what we have are the remains of trees. Now, they cleared trees on a huge scale. There were 20 that we found just on this part. And you can see the road is just here. That's when we were machining it. So it gives you an idea of it. That's a 20-ton mechanical excavator. So that gives you an idea of scale. And here it is running just there. You can see the later outer ditch on this side. And there's the very, very faint trace of the earlier ditch when it was first constructed. Here is the quarry pit that they used for some of the metalling for it. But I've circled these trees, and this gives you a good example of what they look like when they're removed. So they removed these. They actively burnt these out. They cut them down to their stumps, and they probably burned them out, or they pulled them out. We don't know, but they removed undergrowth and everything from this site because the place we're at actually is part of the Rockingham Forest medieval hunting park, if you like, and heavily wooded. And we know it was quite heavily wooded even in the late Romano-British period. We know this. So they were forced to move these wood, which was brilliant. And the Romans placed a lot of store in wood. In fact, the word timber is their word materia. It means everything. It means absolutely everything. So that was the first thing we saw. And you can actually see under the road as well. Because when we dug the road, here it is looking down one of our sections, and you can see the beautiful just there, the embankment just there. And you can see here, which is actually the earlier ditch. We're not going to come to that just yet. But what we have here are the remains of trees. Now, we call them tree throws, and they are the remains of trees. Or rather, this is a bit more technically tree boles. But that's what these are. Generally speaking, all their natural features. It's very difficult to tell which is which, but they're definitely natural features that have been removed. And it's in order to build the road. And then you get the level of, just as a thing, the sheer level of human endeavor that is involved in building this thing, even just one stretch. And if we think under the reign of Diocletian, for example, the Romans built something in the region of over 52,000 miles of road in the Roman Empire, then we can conceptualize that at just this little bit just here is an enormous undertaking. And this, for example, that's a 2-meter scale. This is one of their quarry pits that they use for the road. And you can see it was enormous. It was something in the region of 6 meters wide and about 7 meters long. So, and it was just about over a meter deep, and they fully exploited this. And I think that that gives us a really good sense of the, like I said, the nature of the human endeavour. So why they built where it was, I think where they built it exactly where it was, this should give you a really good sense of it, because it's incredibly hard for me to find photographs of it to show you accurately exactly how the landscape stood. You'd have to stand there and look at the landscape to really appreciate the topography. But this gives you a really good idea. There's the road there, and this is the south, the east-facing hill that comes in just here. So this is the road. You can see that it goes nice and level and flat as it gets this side, which is just here. But over here, it changes ground by over 1.5 meters within 5 meters. So it's a huge drop just here. And the road, we know the road continues this way, and I'll show you why in a second. It's just there. So we know it continues. But you can get a real sense of how they built this thing, and perhaps better illustrated by this, which shows you it from that perspective. So we're actually looking at that part of the road as we're looking at this way. You can see that rather drastic hill just coming down here, and the other one coming down here. Now, as a small aside, I actually remember with my site team, we actually stood, it was a heavy rainstorm because we dug this in the summer, and it was a heavy rainstorm, and we stood on the road just here because we wanted to see what would happen when it rains, you know, and the road still worked, which was utterly astonishing. The road, it still performed its job, because all of this you see here is colluvial silt. It's silt that's become trapped and sat there down this hill slope because the road has been there. And it still worked, and we stood out there for a large amount of time. I will be honest, the rest of the team largely under duress, but it was okay because I'm their boss. So what we have, as you can see, that the amount, that is the natural level there. That is one of the drainage ditches. That is the geological level of the ground. And then you can see here how they built it up. And you can see as well how they actually met it into the hill. And at this side, the road had actually been washed away because it hadn't been built anywhere near like this, because it followed the contour of the hill. Now, of course, without going into it with too much technicalities, what I really want to do is introduce you to a lot of the stuff we found, and a lot of the stuff that nobody else knows about just yet. So you'll be the first people to see what it is we kind of are thinking now more about this. But I'm sure that later on, if I write an article or something for the itinerary, which I'm dying to do, I will go much more into this. So to the north of the road, just here, we know it was cut into the ground. It was actually cut with the construction cut. Now, the other side of the road that I've just shown you, there was no sign of construction cut that we could tell. And of course, that was very difficult to see archaeologically anyway. So we couldn't really see, well, I couldn't really see whether or not there was a cut, but here there is a definitive cut for the road. And you can see that because it sinks. Later on, it sinks in. So you get the heavy bottom layer at the bottom just here, the bottom metaling layer, and then you get the slag layer, as we call it, later on, the tap slag layer, which is what they laid it with. But then we find some idiosyncrasies for the road. So that just gives you an idea of this. We find weird things to do with the road that I don't quite understand just yet. And like, for example, this. Now, the first thing you can probably make out are the wheel ruts, and I'll come to that in just a moment. There's one there and one here and one there. Now, this is a very busy place. It's a very busy road. But what we found, it was quite enigmatic, were a line of posts across the road. Now, they might have something to do, because this is in the first phase. Now, this is where the weather has largely removed this. So this is actually stratigraphically the earliest thing. And that little patch there is all that remains of 300 years of stratigraphy after that. So this is in the 1st century, the late 1st century, and then into the early 2nd. This is the metaling layer, the original limestone layer. And these posts were certainly cut into that layer, and they were contemporary with the road, and we don't know why. They're about 1 meter apart. That one is about 1 meter apart, and this one is just under 1 meter. Now, it could be, very interestingly, it could be something to do with the villa estate itself. It could be some way of marking the villa estate, and numerous things have been suggested. Are they for some kind of gateway? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think that's absolute nonsense, actually. And the thing is, the it was clearly used when these posts were either in or they've been removed, because the wheel ruts clearly go across these things, and they're not going to do that if the posts are in the way. So they might have something to do with the setting out of the road itself, because of the hill and the confluence of hills and everything else. It could have something to do with that. But at the moment, and there's a lot of things that we could explore, but it's just one of those wonderful little mysteries that keep you up at night. So the thing is about the road is that what we forget about archaeology, and especially what we forget about roads when we study roads and when we look at Roman roads, especially in Britain, is that we see them as static entities. They are a fixed thing. It's like looking at an old photograph. We tend to forget, and it is a completely normal human thing to do. We miss the people. We forget that these things home to people. People were moving. It's a landscape of movement. They are moving up and down this thing all the time, and roads were organisms, and they absolutely were. Because people, you imagine you're meeting people on the street today, and you chat and talk to each other, or if you're British, you will make eye contact with somebody, panic, and leave, because that's what we do. You don't want to talk to people, and I imagine that in the past it was similar to that. So what we have is the road in movement. We actually have evidence for people on the road, but also people changing the road. Now we know that the road gets repaired, and we have evidence for roads being repaired because they are subject to this. They don't last that long, not really, because if you've got landscape, if you've got people moving on them all the time, especially carts and things, they're incredibly damaging. And we have this wonderful milestone from just outside Southampton, later used in a wall, which says, obviously, in his 18th year of Tribunician power, restored the roads which had fallen through in age. Now, this is probably the early 3rd century, probably during the reign of Caracalla, but that is very, very debated. And what's really interesting about this is it gives you a really good idea that that this is happening. Because I think it's just a really nice indicator. We had nothing similar to this. But yes, so they repaired the road quite a lot. So in the 1st and 2nd centuries, when it was first used, you had this, and you can see the road is sinking. So the road has already started to sink, and then they build it up. And that's why you see aggers sometimes are larger and larger. They're actually much larger and higher than they were ever intended to be, really, because they kept being built up. There's no evidence at all, just in case a preemptive question. There is absolutely no evidence at all of any kind of medieval interaction with this at all. We have no evidence of the later periods other than the 5th, maybe the late 5th century. We have no real evidence of this. No field boundaries respect this road, and that's why it's preserved so beautifully, because it was disused, because they stopped using it, because it was largely just meant to serve a villa landscape and its neighbours. And villas kind of go out of use. For example, Gildas never mentions villas, for example, in the 5th century, when he's writing about the fall of Britain, rather, I don't know, scaremongery, if you like. Anyway, so when the road was first built, you can see this layer of metalling just here, and you can see the wheel ruts through it and everything else. But then, of course, they repaired this thing. And that's their first repair was in the early 2nd century. So we think between 100 and 150 AD, they repaired it again. They got another repair out of it just here, maybe when the villa was built, okay? And then they repaired it again, and you see another repair again, where they actually made the road wider. Just here, you can see that first line of black. And what you're looking at with this black, you like, is ironworking slag, as we call it. It's actually a very specific type of ironworking slag. All of this is slag, and it's a Roman type called tack slag. So we know it's the Roman period, but it's not the Iron Age period, which is different. And we've calculated that they've used something in the region of 30 to 40 tons of this. And you do get examples of this using actual metal, if you like, because the road was actually metalled, which was astonishing. You do get examples. I think there's a villa in Sussex, in the Forest of Dean. There's a road there, and that uses iron metalling. That uses iron, bits and pieces like that. But here we find it because of where we are. So we've got this industrial landscape, And that's what they're using. But can you imagine, I just want you to form this in your mind, can you imagine bringing this stuff to the site and then laying it and then using herds of animals to flatten it down? Because I will give the Romans complete credit here, or rather the Romano-British. I will give them complete credit here, because even our 20-ton mechanical excavator didn't make a dent on this thing. It sat on the top, and that's how we excavated it. Again, it's one of the questions that often people ask me is, how did you make it look like that? Well, we didn't. We followed the line, and we sat on the top. It was a different way of doing it. You have to sit on the top and then bring your bucket up here, and it was just a very good machine. And we brought it up here, and the batter, the sides were absolutely compact, and the machine didn't touch the thing at all. It barely made a dent. So, and I really like that. And of course, then I showed you the ditches earlier, and I'm not really a big fan of showing people ditches on talks, because we think in the field, archaeologically speaking, especially in the rural landscape of Britain, ditches are our bread and butter. We absolutely love it. And if you've worked with an Italian archaeologist or some Mediterranean archaeologists, they do not understand ditches whatsoever, because they don't really find them very often. But archaeologists in Britain, we love a good ditch. We really do, especially in February, Anyway, so this is the early ditch, and it conforms to general patterns of these features. Now, another thing, again, another question I get asked quite a lot is, what's the distance between the road, which is just here, the shoulder of the road on one side, and the distance between the ditch? And it's about 5 meters. And that is probably where the horses would have gone on that space. They'd have gone on that space because 5 meters, and it also allows for runoff, which you can actually see it's still working. That there is silt that has come down even while we were on site. That is silt from the road that has washed down here. And if the ditches were open, that silt would have been collected into the ditches themselves. So this is the early ditch, and they made one hell of a mistake with that. It was very, very shallow, even allowing for truncation, later truncation. So this is the first thing they did was dig a ditch just here. They dug another one on the side. And this one, you can tell that it suffered through rather a lot of meteorological change. It suffered through really bad weather, because this fill here is much darker, much more organic. So it had a lot more to do. So these ditches are just here. We're looking at the road going off that way, and there's the road on this side. So another thing they did, which is probably my favorite part of the whole thing, was on the other side, and that was a distance, you can see it just there, a distance of just over 1.5 meters. They cut another ditch. Now, they did this on purpose because they didn't want to flood the road, of course. So they cut the ditch, and that is just here. And it is, you can't really see it, but it's just where I've annotated that black line just there. And the thing is, they realized about within a generation, I would assume, it's very difficult to date these things, but I'll come to that. They soon realized that it was useless, because you have the hill here, and it rains a lot, and you have the hill here, and it was probably just flooding the road. And we did find in the section there were large bits of silt that they'd obviously side while they were relaying the road. They didn't want to build on top of it, so they pushed it to the side and they let it down the Agger again. So what they did was they actually built it up, and they made it into a bank. And they made an enormous bank. It was huge. It would have stood over 1 meter high, perhaps, in some places, but they only did it just where it would have been bad, where it would have really, really affected them. And you can see that just here. That there, we don't know what that is. It's probably modern truncation. Or another theory is this little bit of clay that you're probably looking at just there. There's the ditch. That's the bank later on. There's the trees that are underneath it. That there, it might have been a clay stopgap, if you like, to stop the bank collapsing. So it's within the construction cut of the bank itself, and it may have been to stop the bank subsiding this way. Which I absolutely loved this thing, because what it shows the reality of their existence. It is showing their human side, where they are adapting as much as they possibly can to the landscape before them. And it also helps, in retrograde, it also helps to establish how the road was built and when it was built. Because the military would have built it, or the military community rather, would have built it to their set plan. They'd have built it for what they thought and they'd have just got it done because it was just meant to penetrate. It was simply meant to join point A to point B. I doubt really the military ever really thought, especially when they were doing these roads. I'm only talking about here, I'm not talking about the north, or so this is the central belt region, if you like. I largely think they just didn't really concern themselves with the legacy of these things. And it fell to the people who owned the landscape. And we're going to come to that again. But it probably fell to them, and it was their idea. They probably got somebody in to say, this is what you need to do. So they built this bank just here, and you can see it just there. And I really love this because it's really human. And then we come to something else that's really human. I was just going to show you a photograph of the road from the top down, and I was going to say, you know, you can see the wheel ruts, and you largely, to be honest with you, you can't until you look at it like this, which was a kind of LiDAR composite that we used with a camera on a drone that we stuck on a drone with a bit of gaffer tape. And it worked. It worked really, really well. And you can see there's one there. This is at the end of the road. And you can also see the landscape as well, the complete change. There's the bank. Well, that's a vestige of it. There's the bank just there. And you can see there's one there and one here. And they continue. So another question, which I'm sure a lot of you at the research association, what side of the road did they drive on? But both. They're human. They don't care. They just don't care. So probably both. For the large part, they just it's both. You never know. There could be some marks between foot traffic and wheel traffic, but we just don't know. But we know that they definitely used the road with carts, and they were heavy. These carts were heavy. So this is part of the road that I showed you earlier with just the stone on it. So this is where all of we were able to see it in plan. So we were able to actually see these wheel ruts in plan, because everywhere else, these wheel ruts had been repaired and they were only visible in section, or if we were taking it off in plan, which means that we were taking it layer by layer. And what we mean by that in archaeology is you take off the top layer. It's called single context. You take off the top layer and then you peel it back like a book. And it's very time consuming, and only really if you have a lot of time. But we were able to do that. We were able to work a hybrid system with the road itself. So to give you a better idea, and the gauge of the road as well is something we were able to hypothesize on. So we're able to use these two, largely speaking. Also, this is the section that went through the road. You can see that the topography underneath the road it's another thing. Again, I'm just going to I sound like Columbo. Another thing about this is they didn't cut the road in. They built on it. They built on the topography, and they built it up to what they needed. It was like the siege of Masada when they built the ramp during the reign of Vespasian. They built the ramp up, and that's what they did. They didn't cut it into the ground because that would have made life hard for them, I think. So they actually built it on it, and you can actually see the difference in the topography underneath the road itself. So you've got one rut here, one rut there. So generally speaking, the standard Roman axle width that has been hypothesized, if you like, is about 1.4 meters. So it's about 1,400 centimeters, 140 centimeters, sorry, about 1.4 meters. But here on Prize Hall, we saw that it was about 1.6, and that is allowing us as well for the spread. So we're looking between 1.4 to 1.6, which is a particularly large vehicle, or indeed a heavy vehicle. So this could be something that has been used to transport the tiles, for example, on the other side. But again, this is something we're gonna come to in a bit. So, and when I said to you before about the repairs, this is indeed what they did do. They repaired the ruts. You can see one here and one here, and they repaired it. There's the road coming. You can see the hill that comes down here, and the road as it ramped upwards. You can't even see the other side. I'm actually pointing at the screen. That's embarrassing. You can't see the other side of the hill to where the road continues. So the road bridged this hill and went back down again. And it was lovely. You couldn't, that's one of our vehicles just there. And you had to stand on top of the vehicle to see the road on this side. And I think that is just wonderful. Anyway, so these ruts were repaired with that iron slag that I told you about earlier on. And you can see they've compacted it, and they've made sure that these are level. And then they build, of course, their layers on top. And it's really good because what this gives us is a real sense of the wheeled traffic. And when I say wheeled traffic, to give you an idea, this is the sort of thing that they would have been traveling on the road, like the plough just here, the very common kind of cart. But also you get this one, which is a much more upper class one. And if a romantic conceit, of course, if we are on a Romano-British villa estate, then these are elite people. I mean, something less than 1% of people would even be allowed in a Roman villa in Britain. So largely speaking, the majority of people using this road were people on horseback, people walking for the most part under their own steam. This kind of thing pulled by oxen here, for example. And we do have literary evidence to go with this, you know, that roads, generally speaking, weren't the best. You know, we've got the Vindolanda tablet, for example, from Octavius to Candidus, where he's complaining that he would have brought the hides to him, you know, but had the roads not been so bad. I think it's something like "We I Marley sunt." It's while the roads are bad, and it just gives you this kind of evocation, and it gives you a real sense of the kind of traffic, but also, you know, the amount of people that use this thing. And it's very similar in the artifactual evidence. So, for example, here, these are things that have just fallen off carts, okay, that we found next to the road. Like this here is a fragment of tegula, which is a roof tile. And you can see that it's one of the examples where a deer has lovingly walked across it when it was being dried. And that fell off one of the carts, but it's not complete. In fact, that's been cut on purpose. We don't know why, because it's not complete. They're much bigger than that in their real term. And then coins as well. We had these late 3rd century coins to show that, again, the road is continuing on for centuries. These 3rd century coins just here, and they're knackered, they're disgusting, because they were just caught, they were found within the bank area, just in the bank. So it was silt and silt and silt. All those years of rain and silt just abraded these coins away. And then we had this, this wonderful globular jar that had actually fallen in, almost complete, onto the top of the bank itself, and then was covered over by time, just by time. And that dates to around the middle to late 2nd century. So again, we've got this wonderful kind of scheme of things going on. And then we know as well that the road was used by the people of Prize Hall itself, the industrial landscape. And again, it's a romantic conceit because found from the Tyleries, which is, of course, just here, and we're looking at that part of the site, and there's the road, but we do have a road connecting, remember, to this, and I'll come to that. We do have a road connecting this to the villa. We actually have a really rare find that you don't find very often. We have an inscription. I say an inscription, this is actually more technically a graffiti or a graffito. And this is one of the tilers. And I think we can reasonably say that this person would have walked on that road. They would have used that road, maybe to get to work, maybe it was their daily commute, or maybe they were asleep. Regardless, they probably used that road. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. And just one morning in the middle of the 3rd century AD, a tiler sat down and probably at the start of his shift and decided he was going to write his name in a tile. So when the tile was wet, well, when it was kind of semi-dry, he got his finger and he signed in this. And this is what it would look like here. So it's Potentinus. So Potenti, Potentinus, fake it, has made me. Potentinus has made me. So Potentinus, if you like, would have used that road. I'm absolutely certain of it. And not just that as well, I think this is a really nice bridge as well to the archaeology, because Potentinus might have been literate, and because ideas, of course, flowed along these roads, but he might have been literate and he might have been very, very proud of his work, but he was a dreadful tiler, because this tile was bloated and it died and it got completely thrown out, and that's why we found it as part of the tilery. So Potentinus, it really probably should be called the Wheel Potentinus, for example. And I really like that. And in fact, if we go back, you can see, I don't know if you can, there's a line in the middle, that's with his finger, and in the middle there, you can see that's his fingernail drag mark. So you can actually trace your finger along his and know exactly what it was. And something really alarming about it is the fingers are quite small as well. They're not very big. So that's one thing that would have come along that road, but also fashion items from all over the Roman world and all over Roman Britain would have come along that road, because found nearby was this beautiful thing. This is an armlet or a bracelet, and I hope you can see this because it's got two different types of alloy. Here you can see the light blue, the dark blue, the light blue, the dark blue, light blue, dark blue, and you can see it's beautiful. It's not complete, obviously, but and what this is, it's an effect, and they did this on purpose so it would catch light. So if you're wearing it, it would shimmer, and particularly it was designed to catch firelight. So it would make this wonderful effect in firelight, and I just think that's a really beautiful thing, and it's much more to do with that kind of, again, these roads, we forget sometimes that they do something. They are always in movement. They're dynamic, and these things are brought to sight by this road. And we actually get to meet some of the people as well that maybe helped build it, or even something else strange might be going on here. So this is the body of a woman aged 5 to 35, and she was interred next to the road, and we found her completely by accident because she was buried quite deep. Now, usually what you find when you find skeletons or human remains, usually when you find human remains, they're quite high to the surface when you the topsoil off with the machine. But this lady was unusual. So there she is with the road just here. And there's your gap, and the original ditch actually is just there, and that's the later ditch that cut across the top. And unusually she was buried just nearly a meter deep, and that's why we didn't find her. We were digging the ditch out. We didn't find her until by accident. And here she is. Now, it could be indeed, because it's just there, it could be indeed that this lady here was a member of the community that lived in the village next door, 800 meters to the west, which again, you can see in a moment, but 800 meters to the west, she may have lived there. Indeed, she may have been a slave, for example. But what this is we carbon dated this lady here, and we were able to date her to the road because very clearly she's in alignment with the road, and she was buried almost certainly close after it was finished. And the carbon date, now carbon dates from Roman period sites, to tell you the absolute truth, they're largely useless in isolation. You have to do a broad sweep because the Romans were only here for 367 years. That's not a long time. So you can broad dates, and this lady was no different. So we returned a date between 43 BC and 126 AD. That's a long time. It can't have been 46 BC, because the Roman Empire, A, they weren't here, and B, they had enough going on. You know, a couple of years before that, Julius Caesar was stabbed to death by 20 of his friends. And they were engaging in one of the nastiest civil wars the Roman Empire ever suffered. So it can't be then. So it can't be this side of the first century, if you like, AD. So we go past the first century, and we have another calibration curve of probability where we're looking at 68%, broadly between 10 to 80 AD, which I think is a really good one. I think that's probably more likely what we're looking at. So we could reasonably say, and even then it can't be before 43. So we're looking between 43 and 100 AD, just to be judicious for the burial of this person. So that means that the road must have been constructed in, I don't know, the governorship of Agricola, for example, in the 80s. It must have been then. But what's mysterious about her, and it's the grave cut is something else as well that is kind of mysterious, is, again, it's a romantic conceit. Could it have been buried in secret? Could they have buried this lady in secret, and actually because they weren't allowed to? Because roads, they act as liminal boundaries as well. And when I say liminal, I mean it's the difference between space and place. It's for example, liminality in archaeology is easy to see. And to compare it to a modern terminology, if you go to a party, and you go to a party and it's a house party, for example, you loiter at the door before you go in. And that is a broad form of liminality. And that's kind of what we do. It's very common in the Saxon period, for example, the post-Roman period. You do find, burials quite often associated with Roman roads. And in fact, I assumed when we found this individual that she was probably Saxon. But it turns out, no, she's Iron Age, and she's probably a native of that landscape. And we are planning to do radioisotope analysis on her teeth to actually confirm whether or not she is a local. Because intriguingly, if she isn't a local, that brings about a world of possibilities that we're able to talk about. But she may have been buried in secret. And one of the archaeologists that excavated it, even I think it's a lovely thing, but we can't really go there. But she suggests, what was she the wife of one of the soldiers that died, and he wanted to bury her near him, or something as wonderful as that. You just never know. It's the beauty of archaeology. You just never really know. So another component about the road that we do need to touch on briefly, that's a big part of it, is roads are mostly studied on their own, basically, or as part of a network, or where roads go. Very rarely are we able to actually see what roads are for, what they are used for other than travel. And as we've just seen before, they are perhaps used as a liminal boundary between a spiritual realm, or for example, or something else, or anything else post-processual we want to go with. Or they could also be used, and there are Roman writings that talk about roads being used as boundaries. And perhaps we might be able to say that the road here at Priors Hall Villa acted as that boundary. And what I've started with here is, whereas on arriving at the property in question, it's a very, very common legal term that you find in legal texts. And there's only one in Britain that I know of for a piece of forestry, because believe it or not, we know, that Roman Britain is the most studied Roman province in the whole empire. More work is done here every year by archaeologists due to development-led archaeology than anywhere else in the Roman world. And yet we still don't really understand Roman Britain. There's so much we don't know about it, and we're constantly throwing up new surprises about things that surprise us. And we don't know how land management worked in the province, but perhaps we could go some way to, I don't know, talking about it. And we start with Domitius Ulpianus, or rather Ulpian. I'm sure that many of you are aware of. This is from the Digest compiled in the 86th century, but he was writing probably in the 2nd to 3rd century. And it's how they classify roads, more rather broadly. So private roads are what some called agrarian roads. Local roads are those that are in villages or lead to villages. And then you get these. You get these that some call public, which is true. Now, this is the key bit. Provided that they have not been established by the contribution of land by private persons. Now, there's the bank on this side, and this level of work that we see on Priors Hall Road does suggest that there is a direct injection of cash coming from somewhere, and it seems very likely that the villa owner is responsible for this, or the villa owners are responsible for this, because we have this kind of thing. Where we it could be like the maintenance similar to, I don't know, the medieval period, perhaps, where you got local lords, churchmen are responsible for, as part of manorial agreements, for example, where the king reminds them, you need to, if that road runs through your land, you need to maintain it. And there are numerous primary sources from the medieval period of people constantly trying to get out of their obligation to fix these roads. And it could be something similar going on in the Roman period. Because roads as boundaries, especially at Priors Hall Villa, it could be something like this. This is taken from an absolutely essential work, which is a writing which was compiled much later in about this, believed to be maybe the 4th century, 5th century. But this is part of that work. It's called the Book of Colonies, and in it they mention quite a lot. And it's an anonymous author. It's a last set of authors, but through certain areas, military roads fix the boundary. That immediately, and then sometimes boundaries are marked by tombs. Well, that's interesting, considering, guess what we found on the other side of Priors Hall, about exactly a kilometre from this. Could we be looking at the other end of that? And other locations, boundaries are, this is mostly talking about Italy, by the way, but you know, largely, I think we can safely assume that it wouldn't have been that much different. Largely, it would have gone on land division that was in place before the Romans arrived. The Romans were so successful. Again, it's a question that asks me quite a lot: is what, you know, how did they succeed? Well, the Romans were largely successful because they didn't really get involved too much with anything until they had to. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong, Britain was an interesting place, shall we say, to the Romans. They didn't like it very much. They thought that the most barbarian thing that Britain could possibly do was wear trousers. In fact, the word feminine, I think, has a root in the word for trouser, which is feminalia. And because it was just absolutely a barbaric thing to do, of course, we know that the Roman soldiers stationed on the northern frontier in Vindolanda, for example, they called us the Britunculi, the nasty, smelly little Britons, which I really liked. I tried to call my son that when he was born, Britunculus, but it didn't go down as well as you would expect. So, yeah, because Britain was a difficult place, especially militarily. In fact, Britain always, we didn't behave, shall we say, and we always acted differently. So, I don't know, for example, the Roman army in Britain in the AD 2nd century was exceptionally large as a military presence. It amounted to something in the region of 12% of the entire empire's military complement was in Britain. And that's only 4% of its entire landmass. So Britain was a bit of a problem child for the most part. But the Romans learned that they largely let people get on with things. And I think what we're looking at when we're looking at boundaries, especially to land management, is we're largely looking at what came before, and they would follow ditches or they would follow what happened before, because change, you know, is retaliative. And largely, I think the Romans kind of just let people get on with it. And as long as you paid your modi of grain, for example, or you paid your monthly stipend, they largely just let you get on with it for the most part. I think you'd have very rarely even seen a Roman soldier. They were busy in the north anyway, but for the most part, I don't think you'd have ever encountered a Roman soldier. So other locations are demarcated by roads and hollows in the ground. Now this is kind of carnage, isn't it? Because it could be anything. Paths, fences, and other methods mentioned before. Now the other methods he mentions before are things like a pile of rocks, for example. He'll mention a pile of rock, my God, and then he'll mention things like hedgerows or all sorts of you know, strange things. So you imagine what these land agents must have been putting up with when they were trying to sort this out. So that's a really good frame, if you like. Because what we have here is we actually have that. I think we have this network, this boundary network, and I've just realized the time. Would someone mind sending me a chat to see if I'm okay for time? Because am I okay for time? Is everybody having a good time? Because I realize that I digress quite a lot. So if somebody could just let me know if I'm okay for time, and none of you want me to just be quiet, yeah. Okay, that's good. That's yes, great talk. Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate my enthusiasm. That's damning me with faint praise, I think. I appreciate that. I appreciate my enthusiasm. It sounds like my wife. So when it comes to this, we get the villa boundary just here. I realized that my laser pointer has gone off. Okay. I don't know if you can still see my laser pointer, but you can see to the right of your picture, where I say villa boundary, that is a villa boundary ditch, we think, and that is the ditch, or the Romans would call them fossa or fossae, and that's the Roman word for ditch. And you get, for example, which is probably rooted in that. So yeah, we get the villa boundary on this side, and then you can see at the bottom of that you get a gap in the ditch. Now, really interestingly, because as an aside, if you like, when you get a gap in the ditch, you get them by two what we call termini or terminus to terminate. So the ditch terminates here and it terminates there. It doesn't continue any further. So you have a distinctive gap. And believe it or not, the Roman god of boundary markers was called Terminus. And they have Terminus as well. He sounds great, doesn't he? He just would never stop. So entrance would come maybe in here to the right. I just don't know if my laser pointer is. There it is. It's back. There it is. And there's the Willowbrook here, the Willowbrook stream, or the watercourse where it probably crossed here. So there's the entrance here, and then we have another ditch on the inside that could denote some form of boundary to the estate itself. Rather than just using the road, maybe they used several tandem systems. And again, remember, this is just a talk for maybe an hour or so. There's a lot more to this, of course. So I'm just trying to touch on everything a little bit, and then obviously digressing. But I'm just trying to touch on a little bit of anything. But if anything really interests you, please, remember to ask. And then we get a bit further on. If we go a little bit further, if we zoom in just a little bit, you see that there's a line of fence posts or posts immediately before you turn right onto their villa driveway. And you can see this is clearly marcating space. It is clearly delineating a change of space. And look at this. I've written, what's this? Because it's I don't know, but it's another entrance into the ditch just here. You can see these little dots, or rather patches of brown you see, are the remains of trees. They're tree throws. That's the actual roadway itself, again with the trees in it. That's the boundary ditch. So maybe you come off the road and you come through this little bit just here if you're pedestrian. I don't know if you're a pedestrian, perhaps. And then you have to go again, and you have to go through the gateway. Now, this, sadly, of course, this wasn't available, so we couldn't tell not where the crossing was, but it almost certainly would have been the crossing to here. And plus, the Willowbrook Street was a little bit as well. It was probably far wider in the past as well, and it's definitely moved due to later quarrying, believe it or not. So when you turn right, we also get the avenue. We get the villa's driveway, and again we can frame this using a primary source, and in this case the wonderfully obsequious Pliny the Younger, who is one of my favorite characters from Roman history because he's so utterly transparent. If you ever get a chance, or if you have no social life, or if you completely and utterly want to alienate everybody, please do go and read Pliny's letters to Trajan during the second century. Early second century. Go and read his letters to Trajan, and they are astonishing. What can I do here? What can I do in this part of my province? What can I do here? You see, Trajan saying just.
Paddy, I'm reluctant to butt in, but we're having really big sound problems. Can you hear me?
Asking me questions. Anyway,
Paddy, can you hear me?
Pardon?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we're having major sound issues. They've been intermittent throughout, but we've just about got away with it. But it seems to be when you turn your head to the right, we just cannot hear you. So if you try to keep looking as straight on as possible, we should be fine. And as close to the microphone.
So don't move.
I'll shut up now.
Okay. No, that's fine. I will. Yes. So I will not move. That's impossible. So Pliny, or rather Gaius Plinius Cacillus, as he was called, he's a valuable, incredibly valuable source for how Roman roads worked, and also villa landscapes, elite landscapes. So the view on either side of the road, and this is later letter to his friend Gallus. He's writing about his villa in Tuscany. The view on either side of the road is full of variety. So sometimes the road narrows as it passes through the woods, and then it broadens and opens out through wide meadows where there are many flocks of sheep and herds of horses and cattle. And we can probably see the same thing on Price Hall. For example, here is the avenue. This is the villa site just here. This is where the village was. This is where the mausoleum Tyleries was. And here you can see the two ditches of the avenue going immediately to the villa site. I say shrine just here. That's a kink in the ditch. It's a little bit strange. So the avenue, here it is. It's we excavated it for 326 meters. It was about 6.5 meters wide, but sadly we have no real clue about how wide the actual running surface was. It's probably about the same. It's probably about 4 meters or so, I would guess. And the ditches ranged between, north between 1.2 meters to 35 centimeters deep and wide and everything else. I don't know why I included those dimensions, to be perfectly honest. There would have been a reason for it. So constructed AD 100 to 150, in line with the villa estate itself, in line with the villa. And here it is. coming this way. Okay, and generally speaking, it hadn't survived well. Okay, so nowhere near as well as the road immediately next to it, the main road. But the villa would have been just here. And we know, if I go back here, you see all these little dots and everything else, all these little marks you see, they are largely the remains of trees. And those trees, for the most part, gives us a really good indication, because there's some of them had Roman pottery in them. So they were standing basically when this was in. And we know that if you're looking at the villa this way, and some of the metalling did survive, but to give you an idea, it probably looks something like this, with the villa in front of you. And this was purely, I think it must have been intentional. For the most part, it must have been intentional on the landscape of the builder to frame the villa in front of you. And I think that's what it was. So I do appreciate, I hope the sound is better. I really do. Okay, so this is the actual surface of the avenue itself. It uses, again, local stone. And again, you can see some parts of brick and tile and everything else, because this wasn't the actual surface. I think this was one of the lowest parts of it. Okay, and then we get to a pottery kiln, which is right next to it. So I just as you go down the avenue, just here, you can see all we're about in the middle of the site. We're just there. There's the villa, and we're about just there. So these here, and you can see that these are post-medieval. When I say post-medieval, they're about 18th century plough furrows that are just, they are the ultimate enemy of archaeologists everywhere, plough furrows, because they just rampantly destroy everything. And they sure did. They destroyed this avenue for the most part, and only left us pockets in the middle. So these little gaps here, this is where you could see evidence of metalling, but everywhere else largely it was completely gone. And we get to here where these, again, we see two posts in the middle of the road that are contemporary with the road. We see two posts right in the middle, and you'll notice as well that these trees all of a sudden stop. They stop after these posts. They stop. So what you see is you are walking down the avenue with the villa in front of you, framed out, and then you get past these posts, and it just spreads out in front of you, and you will see everything. Maybe herds of cattle, maybe herds of sheep, people working, all sorts of stuff would be going on with this rather grandiloquent building right in front of you, about 100 meters in front. So we're getting a real idea of space. We're getting a real idea of their landscape sense as well. We're getting an idea of them, and also something they were doing. So shortly after the avenue was built, a potter decided to set up shop, and this is it. This is the kiln, and they reused a quarry pit that they used for the avenue itself. They widened it, so there's the original quarry pit just here, and they actually widened it. This bit here, that's the pottery kiln just here. This bit just there is where they sat down. It's where they sat overnight and watched the kiln like this. It's a really interesting and really lovely little vignette. And when we opened it up, we looked at it. The avenue is just here, and you can see that shortly in the middle of the 2nd century, they filled it in with rubbish. Now, some of you will know what a midden pit looks like, or some of you will have worked in British archaeology or any kind of archaeology, where you'll find a pit with a few sherds of pot in it, and you'll say, well, it must be a midden pit. Now, the biggest mystery in British archaeology is not what was Stonehenge for, it was what on earth are pits for, because we have no idea in real terms what pits are for. But this time we know that this is definitely a midden, because they've just used rubbish to throw it in. That is a floor tile just here, and Anna just there is holding a lid of a pot, which is just in there, and that's Anna, the archaeologist that dug it. But really interestingly, again, this ties into the road, because that road would have brought craftspeople with it along the road to Prize Hall itself. And what they were making in the kiln were a variety of different bits, suggest itinerant potters, so people coming in using the same kiln. But the most wonderful one of all of these is a man called Genialis. Now, Genialis came and he made these things. These are called mortaria. And mortaria are wonderful things, big, chunky mixing bowls, if you like. And in the middle, they've got little stones. They're called trituration grits. and it's for grinding things. It's for grinding medicines or food. And a really interesting thing that was once told to me by a ceramic specialist is there are more mortaria of this mortaria vessels found in Britain than the rest of the empire. And we don't really know why. It's one of those just one of those wonderful things. We don't really know why. But Genialis on site is an interesting character. Okay, so we know this because he stamped his pottery, which is what you do with mortari. The maker stamps it. So not only do we have Potentinus, we also have Genialis. Now, Genialis obviously sounds like a cheerful man. But you can see it's in retrograde. So that's why we couldn't really see it. We needed a genuine specialist to see this. But here it is. It's Genialis. So that's Silias, Genialis, just there like that. But Genialis is really interesting because he's working in the first half of the 2nd century. So we can trace this man. And he actually comes from, we believe, Caestus St Edmunds, which is Venter Icenorum. It's the centre of the Iceni, if you like, in East Anglia. And that's where his potteries start. So Genialis, or rather his workshop, is working at Prior's Hall. And it's this wonderful interconnectivity. And whether or not they came on the road or not is largely arbitrary. It's this interconnectivity that we have. And actually, he's a bit of a tart, really. He's all over the place, is Genialis. Obviously, the clue's in the name. So that's a really interesting thing. And then you get bits that, people drop on the avenue itself. And then some interesting ritual bits as well. This on the left is a terret ring or a rain guide for a horse. So it suggests that horses were used in vehicular transport just as much as oxen. And you can see it's been enameled, and it used to come around like that. It's literally a ring, but it's been enameled, which suggests it's locally made. And about it's locally made, so it's deliberately bent, which is something you only do when you want to like ritual. Basically, it's common to see that kind of thing. But that gives a really good idea that these vehicles, the mode of transport for people. And then, of course, we get a brooch. This is a Polden Hill brooch of the mid to late 1st century. And you can see the pin is on this. And this was found right next to those post holes in the middle of the avenue. Now, generally speaking, when you find Roman brooches like this, the pin is often missing or largely like broken. But this one, only the tip of it is broken, which really does suggest that it is fallen off. So and it's really well preserved, so it's not moved. So it fell off somebody's toga, if you like, although very rarely do people ever wear togas, only prostitutes for the most part. They were very, very, well, prostitutes largely wore them. But largely speaking, it was fallen off somebody's tunica or somebody's, cloak or something, their boris or, something else. And it's this wonderful moment in time where this has fallen off of the avenue of a visitor to the villa or the villa owner themselves. So a landscape of movement. So how does this all fit together? Because not only did we find the main road here and the avenue here, we also, on the Iron Age settlement, we also found another trackway that went through the settlement. It bisects it, that went to the villa site itself, which is just here. And we also found another trackway that was right next to the mausoleum. And that's, again, it's very common to find that kind of thing. Right next to well, it wasn't used in the Tuileries. But there was another metal surface, as if we need any more, that actually bisected the industrial site just here. That went all the way down it, that led to the villa itself. So this industrial site was probably used as well to build the villa. And they were basically, we can trace the movement around this landscape. We can actually follow them as they're moving around. Because it's not unfair to say, that they brought it down here, they stopped, they picked up their carts, they drove it back round this way, and they came up down the avenue and up the road to where they wanted to go, maybe north to Laxton or south to Kettering or Ribrey or wherever else they could go. So they're not the only things we found, but we can broadly put them into a much bigger context. So we have, this is Corby, the wonderful, obviously, Rockingham Speedway. That's our site just there. This is modern Corby now. Believe it or not, there's the Gartrey Road. You can see it. That's the Roman road just coming on that way. So we have Priors Hall Villa here, but Priors Hall Villa wasn't on its own. It had a neighbour, but not just a neighbour, it had a really interesting ironworking site in the 1st century BC. So iron was a huge part of this manufacturing landscape. So they had that there. And then 2 kilometres from Priors Hall Villa, it had Little Weldon Villa. Now, Little Weldon Villa was built in the late 1st to early 2nd century. So they're definitely neighbours for the most part. And then another 2.2 kilometres-ish south, you had the wonderful Stannion Villa as well. And that was on the crossroads essentially between the Gartree and this one. And then, of course, if you link it all together with our road, and we know that this road runs past these because Little Weldon found evidence of the road and Stannion found evidence of the road there too. So we know the road runs up and down. And I'm not going to go any further in the landscape just at the moment because it's been a long time. I've been talking for a long time and I'm not sure if any of you can actually hear me. So I'm just talking for the sake of it for the most part. So I'm not going to go much further because I think that's a lot of information to take in. But then we have the other road that coming in this way. So what we have is a landscape of control, essentially, from the Roman period, from villa landscapes, and how roads are absolutely essential. In fact, they are of a fundamental importance in terms of development and expansion of settlement all throughout Roman Britain. In fact, roads are arteries, and I think that's a bit of a cliche now, but that's exactly what they are. They're a neural network of control of how the Romans did it, of how it's not what they did for us, it's how they did it to us. And I think that is a huge part of it. And I think roads are really, really essential, and villas as well. And I think villas are important because villas are virtual evolutions of landscape control from the Iron Age as well. So what we have is this 2 kilometre spacing of contemporary villas, and they're all controlling a bit of land or something else. And they're worked up by the road, and villas are really important in controlling populations. Very similar to, I don't know, 18th century estates, but not quite. So it's an often quoted thing, but not quite. Because if you think, for example, if we conceptualize this appropriately, the government of Roman Britain was really small, really, really small, and the military were busy. Most of the time, they were busy doing much other things. So the government and staff were really small. There was only around, out of, I don't know, 3.6 million people in Britain, there was only around 60 provincial administrators that worked within the province at any one time. And that's something in the region of 0.0017%. So 0.0017% of that population had any form of control about the province at all. And if you compare that today, it's over 25%, I think, today. So villas were important and local landowners were important, and so were roads. Now, if we just finish here on the wonderful thing that we can look at now, and you can see there are some suspicious spacings of villas, aren't there? There are some suspicious villas because these little blue ones, they're villas, and some of them are in suspiciously straight lines, I think. And of course, it is a complete romantic conceit. It is absolutely grasping at straws. So what we could do then, and what Priors Hall has shown, and what I've shown is I've shown you less than 5% of every part of the site. There are huge things that I could talk about this forever. But this is also a good opportunity now to introduce you to actually the archaeological team that dug this, because it's very rare that they get the credit, and they should do. And this, again, it's just another excuse to look at the road, I think, as well. So this is the wonderful archaeological team that did that in the baking hot summer of 2021, and they deserve full credit. I do have a picture actually of the archaeological team walking across the road, like the Beatles' Abbey Road, but I didn't show that because I can't find it. But I would like to say thank you ever so much for sticking with me. Because I think it's been a difficult talk. I don't think people can hear me very well, and I think that's such a shame. But let's see. I can see that there's probably some questions, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. But I really appreciate this. So thank you. Oh, that's lovely. I'm getting some really lovely comments. Absolutely cracking. That, you know, this is you're rocking my world. You really are. But thank you so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Or if you have any opinions that differ from my own, please feel free to just keep those to yourself. So thank you very much.
I'm desperately trying to start my video and well, there we go. It won't go. We're on. If everybody can see me, hopefully you can. Speak up. Right. Well, thank you very much, Paddy. You officially overrun by more than anybody else except me.
Oh.
So which is great. The longer the better.
No, yeah, I don't know whether to be pleased with that or not, but
no,
yeah,
you should be very pleased. In the first hour and a quarter, I think you only lost 2 people, which is unheard of. Normally you lose about 10. Most people do. I lose more. So well done. It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and you talked about a lot of aspects of Roman roads that don't get discussed enough. So well done. Thanks for that.
No, that's that. I think honestly, I want to thank thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to speak to such a wonderful association. I see an embryonic one such as you are. I think it's such a I love this, and I think that roads aren't spoken about enough. I don't think they're spoken about enough. I can certainly say that it's the best thing I've ever found, and I really wish that to be honest, I'd have known that this was here when we were digging it, because I don't think it was. Otherwise, because I'm sure you'd have loved to come and see this, because it was something else.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I did know about it while it was digging. Well, while you were digging, but I just didn't have the chance to get down there. Can't remember right now, but anyway, we do have questions.
I won't take that personally. Go on. Yeah.
We do have questions. Rather a lot, I'm afraid. So we'll try and get through them as quickly as we can, and hopefully your voice will hold up.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. First from David Breer. I caught this as well. Did you actually say that the villa went out of use at the end of the 5th century?
Yes. I'm glad people picked up on that. Yeah, we think so. Yeah. Obviously, if you ever have a chance, if any of your audience ever have a chance to come and speak, see me speak again, I mostly want to talk about Area A, which is the wonderful industrial site, and that's where we had a lot of the rubbish that was when the villa went out of use. And our find specialist, our small find specialist, has identified various metal finds that almost certainly were part of the 5th century. For example, we had this beautiful zoomorphic handle of a box, and he's identified it as confidently between, in the 5th century. So this thing definitely continued into the 5th century. So yeah, we have, and the jury's still out on the pottery as well. So we're still going. But I think just pragmatically, most Roman sites, they don't just end on 410. We think that's largely nonsense. It never just happens. People are still people, and they'll carry on as long as they can, for sure. Yes. So yeah, we do have 5th century evidence.
Right. From Susan, this is regarding the post holes across the road.
Yes.
She's suggesting could they possibly be some sort of early traffic calming measure, a bit in the same way as rising bollards? Or another suggestion she makes is to facilitate customs duties on passing trade.
Oh, that's a really good one. That's a really good one, because
that did go on in certain parts of the empire, but we've got no evidence of it in this country, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, I know of that, and I think yes, I think it's as good as any, because why not? Of course, you did have the portorium. You did have the tax for customs duties. You did have it, but I don't think there's enough evidence to say. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it, because what were they for? We just don't know.
No.
We also have something else that I wasn't able to cover because I was worried that I was going on too long. So I didn't. You may have seen something that said trine, And what that was, it was a kink in the ditch. I don't know if you can see my finger, but it was a kink in the ditch like this with some posts next to it, and it was right outside where the villa would have been, or rather where the villa started. And that might have been something similar. Like you get those little porchways in Pompeian houses where people sit and they monitor people coming in and out, and it could have been something similar to that. So indeed they could have been, but I think it's they could have just been boundary markers.
Yeah.
They might not have even been of any great height. Or even if they were there, I don't know. They were there at one point.
Completely different subject now. Regarding, yeah, you were talking, this is from Paul Smith,
Yeah.
and you were talking about the Agger standing above surface water and the buildup of silt behind it from colluvium coming down from the slope. And Paul asks whether you've found any evidence of a culvert to drain water under the surface of the Agger.
No, that would have, because of the position of the road, it would have drastically affected the actual the infrastructure of the road itself. No, they relied, I think, more than anything else, they just relied on stopping it and maybe just letting it dissipate on its own, because it was incredibly clay rich. The water doesn't really go anywhere, so they just relied on gravity, I think, to move it.
Yep.
And I think they were, to be honest, I think they were constantly battling with it. I think they were constantly trying to battle against it. I think because of the way the road was built and where it was, I think it wasn't suitable for, ironically, it wasn't suitable for longevity of use. It just wasn't suitable for it, but that's why we find it, ironically.
Yeah, I could talk about the longevity of use all night, but we've got to get through this, so I won't. I was so tempted then. Next one from Philip Bevan. Who says, clearly in our pothole age, he's not wrong, we need the Roman road repair units back in business. Facetious point. We don't need to comment, he's just right. I
would agree.
From Bob Eden. Any thoughts on how long it would have taken for this amount of road to be reconsumed into the natural landscape, to become hidden and therefore protected?
Incredibly quickly. I think within a generation it could have gone.
Yeah.
You look at you look at this last slide that I've got up here, for example, and you've got where that vegetation already started growing on it as we were working on it, and it was incredibly high to the level. We took off only, I would say, less than 20 centimeters of topsoil turf to get to the surface. So I think within a generation, this thing could have easily just overgrown. In fact, one of the things that people find most surprising is how quickly things disappear.
Yes.
You get large monumental bits in the landscape, such as only mechanized farming and mechanized agriculture got rid of largely prehistoric monuments. But when they're above ground, when they're enormous, they stay part of the landscape. But things are reclaimed incredibly quickly. Like villas, for example, buildings and everything else, we just get a sense of permanence that unless these things are used, they go out of use incredibly quickly. And I think this one probably within a generation, but that's so much as probably even earlier, but that's so much as to say, who knows if it wasn't used for a long time. There's just no material culture associated with that use. That's the thing. It might not be evidence of absence, indeed, but generally speaking, I don't think it was.
There's a comment rather than a question from Paul Wood. He was part of an excavation on the road crossing the Wye south of Magna in Hereford. That apparently was littered with repairs, and they concluded that they were weather and flooding related. So it's an observation, really, rather than a question. And he's certainly not wrong. You do see many roads with plenty of repairs. Equally, you see some that were hardly repaired at all, and then were in one hell of a state. Which
that's exactly it. I think it's all to do once the I don't know whether you agree, but once I think the central administration chumped up the money for this, and I don't think largely, I think they took what they wanted in the first century. I think in that first throw, and they took whatever they wanted. But after that, I think the central administration of the province kind of just let everyone get on with it. And unless they were strategic or important, then they let. And if they went out of use, that's their own problem.
Yeah. To an extent,
know,
that's certainly right, and I think a lot of it will have depended on how much the Roman administration needed a particular road to remain in use. We do
Indeed.
know for certain, we've got contemporary evidence of this, that rights to land by the sides of roads were granted on condition that those people then repaired the road.
Yes,
And presumably, if they stopped repairing the road, they lost the land. So it was
precisely. I think
rent-free,
that's exactly it.
essentially. So
It's
it
like
did make me
provincial
wonder if that's the
creatorship as well.
situation here, because it does look like it started life as a military road. Certainly, if it's going to Great Casterton, which I know you think it does. I'm not so sure.
Or Durabrivi, and I'm pretty sure there was a fortress near Durabrivi, so I think we're both right.
Yeah, possibly. Anyway, moving on quickly. Oh God, I'm going to struggle to pronounce this. I think it's pronounced Essex Schneider. I hope I've got that right. Have you found references to the road and or the villa in any written record, or was it forgotten? Well,
I think that one's pretty obvious. No, no. Britain, epigraphically, Britain is pretty poor compared to everyone else anyway. But no, we haven't found any reference. In fact, that villa was completely unknown until it was discovered in 2010. And the road was largely unknown until it was discovered in 2010 as well. They found parts, they broadly knew it was going to be on that alignment, I think, due to excavations that were well done and everything else. But no, there's no literary sources whatsoever for any of those villas. You very rarely get any literary sources at all in Britain for much, to be honest, outside of military context. No, which is a real shame. But then we have Potentinus, of course. We have him, and we have the wonderful Potentinus, who I absolutely adore. And then we have Genialis as well. So we do have much more in terms of actual literal record than many others, you know. So we're very lucky in that regard. But my God, would I wish to find it?
Yeah.
You know, in some of those large, like late Roman maps, that would be really lovely.
Well, if we did have any, it's always very sad when you think the amount of epigraphic evidence and written evidence that we've actually got from the Roman period in this country is probably about 0.0001% of what was actually there. It's absolutely tiny compared with what there was. There will have been a huge amount of it. It's all gone.
Oh, I think you do. When we dig sites, for example, when we do archaeology, you are absolutely correct, and I think this is something that's really important to contextualize to large sectors of any population. Is we are looking at a fragment. We are literally looking at a keyhole through a keyhole through a keyhole.
Yes.
What was actually there, and I think that's what makes Prior's Hall so remarkable. Is we've got a slightly bigger keyhole than other places. There is just, sorry, Mike, there is one question that I want to answer this one. Regarding the maintenance or lack thereof of Roman roads after the Romans departed, how does Britain compare to other former Roman conquests? Well, I think, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on this, but I think not very well at all. Our road system, as you all know, it was in use all the way through the medieval period. It was the primary form of the communication network in Britain all the way up to the advent of the turnpike system for the most part in the 18th century. And the Roman road system, it's I think, to be honest, the maintenance or lack of Roman roads, and like Mike and I were just talking about, is outside of big major roads, like you've got the Appian Way in Italy, or some of our roads like Ermine Street, which is it's part of the Cursus Publicus system. It's caught completely up and running all the time. I think we're forgetting the human being element. Humans are inherently lazy, and we are incredibly parsimonious, and they are exactly the same in the past. What we see in the past that is increasingly clear is the people of the past, they're trying their best to get out of it. And I think if they can save some money and not pay for this, they'll get on with it. And you do have evidence for that in Roman Egypt, and you have evidence for that in North Africa, where epigraphy is much stronger, of people trying to get out of this. But Roman Britain was unique. In the entire Roman Empire, Roman Britain was utterly unique. So when the Romans left, and regardless of when they left, when the central administration finally left Britain at some point around the 5th century, Roman Britain is the only province in the entire empire to stop doing everything, to stop making wheel-made pottery, to stop engaging in monetary forms of economy, to stop pretty much everything. And nowhere else in the entire Roman Empire does that happen. It only happens in Britain, and I think it's mostly to do with the fact it's an island. I don't think it's anything to do with we will go back to the Iron Age system because it was much better. And I think it's largely because we were just too far away from the center.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know whether you agree, but I think that's it. I think it actually compares pretty similar to everybody because humans are humans in the past or not.
Yes.
They're the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving very quickly on because the questions are still coming, believe it or not. Okay. Yeah, the road runs southwest through the site of the Geddington Medieval Royal Lodge. Do you think there is a chance that the road was still in use during the early medieval period? I think you touched on that actually.
This all I can safely say, we don't even know how far the road goes north. We don't know really. We know how far it goes south. It goes to Kettering, probably meets another couple of roads on the way down. But I think stretches of road continue to be in use. If they were good for navigating fields or something else or anything, they would still be used. I think roads as a whole, it's difficult. It's incredibly hard to say whether or not they would still be used. I think all I can safely say is that this section of this road that served this villa definitely wasn't used after the abandonment of the villa landscape for sure.
We've got a question from one of our backroom team, Rob Entwistle, who's actually sending me the messages through. And he observes that Isaac Moreno, excavating in Spain, has recorded fine layers of silt between layers of stone, which he sees as evidence of the stone layers being watered and compacted with stone rollers. You knew what was coming, and squeezing out the silt. He's seen wheel marks of construction vehicles in these silt layers. Have you seen anything like that? I'm going to quickly say you probably haven't. I have. Not quite like the squeezing of the silt, but wheel marks.
There's facets of evidence, I guess, that we could see, but not that I would able to say with any kind of confidence. No, I wouldn't say so. No.
No, we actually did. It's what most people refer to as Deer Street. We excavated it back in 2019, just south of Albury, in Brigantham, about 2 miles south. And we were absolutely staggered to find it was largely a clay agate with crushed stone on top. So it was a clay foundation rather than a solid stone foundation. That's quite common in Yorkshire. It's not unusual at all.
It's
what
down here
was
too.
Unusual were wheel ruts in the layers of clay. So in one layer of clay we had ruts that were then filled in with a different type of clay before the next surface was put on top. Before the running surface was put on. So we've got evidence that wheeled vehicles were used in the construction of the road. Apart from Isaac's work in Spain, I've not come across that anywhere else.
No, I think you could interpret our wheel ruts within the bottom layer of the foundation itself, because obviously they never used the metalling to actually drive on. It would have been uncomfortable, rigid axle.
Absolutely,
awful. They use the thin layer of clay on the top, and once you dissipate that, it's really good. So you could use that information. You could use that, I guess, and you could suggest that. But I think it's more. I think, like you said, I think yours is probably the only example I've definitely heard of where it's actually true. I know of an example in Italy because they I think generally speaking in Britain, especially here, I think they used herds of animals, sheep or goats, to do the same thing, to just trample it down. Similar to the canal system when they built that in the 19th century. I think that's generally how they did it. But here, I think they only seemed, and I think it kind of falls into a lot of the primary evidence that we have, a lot of the written evidence that we have, that roads would only be repaired when the ruts of the vehicles finally went into the agar material. When they went finally too far down to go any further, that's when they were repaired. So they left it till that moment. I think that's what we're looking at. In the actual building of the road, no, I'd love to be able to say yes, but no, I think yours is probably the only example.
Right. Goodness me, we've got an awful lot to get through. We're going to have to be really quick with the answers here, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right, working through them. From David Ratledge, who does, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he does a huge amount of work with LiDAR. He's found a road heading down towards Corby from 571. Actually, so have I, and so several other people have. He asks,
Yeah.
could you be your Villa connection? Yes, David, it is. Although we suspect there's a junction or a crossroads
Yeah.
at one point. So the answer is
Yeah.
yes.
Please let me. Obviously, I'm kind of Please email me this. tell me about this. This would be great. This would be good to add to our.
Yeah, it's there's several sections of it that are as clear as a bell on LiDAR. It's been spotted for a couple of years actually, but it wasn't really
astonishing.
first
Yes,
of all.
yes.
David
This
Breer
is why
again.
I'm doing this. Yes.
Yeah, who observes, and it's a point in observation, basic knowledge of Latin at a working class level, i.e. the inscribed tile. These names I've forgotten now. And that's whether you call tile makers working class. I'm not sure whether that's really accurate.
No, I think you're right. I think by the period in which Patentinus was working, I think within the third, I think we can't possibly say. I think Mary Beard has recently, for example, postulated that something like less than 10% of the entire empire was literate in any real meaningful sense. And whether or not you could count writing your name and made this at the end of something as literate, and whether or not you could read Ovid, for example, or the Aeneid or something else, I think I don't know whether it was common in tilers necessarily. You would find they could indeed write their names, and you do find them. For example, there's a tile in Museum of London, Australis Divus Tradicum Agatus Cotidum. It's a rhyming meter, and that's Australis every 3 days goes off by himself. So it's an errant tiler of something like that. But I don't think we could possibly say, because most of the signatures we ever see on tiles, when we see signatures, for example, are swirls. They're just where people have just swirled their finger in the tile. I would love to be able to say, but I don't think we'd be able to make out literacy amongst that type. And I think you're right. Working class, I think, is not necessarily right. I think they were craftspeople, and they were very, very much a wanted community for sure.
Yes. Quick one from Susan. Again, any idea of the date of the armlet/bracelet with the two twisted alloys?
Yeah, late Roman. It's fourth century.
Right. Philip Bevan. As a general road point, you emphasize the enormous human/animal effort to build the roads. But can we go back to basics? If legionary troop and engineers were used for hard work in forward positions, most roads must have been made by slaves using ponies/donkeys and oxen. If we look at the 19th century railways construction, the deaths en route were considerable, and graveyards are many along the routes, e.g. on the Settle-Carlisle line. You're certainly right. Where are the, or were there, I'm not sure which he means, the mass graves along Roman roads?
I've never heard of them.
No, me neither.
I think I've never heard of them. It's a question I get asked quite a lot about slave labor, and I don't think they used slave labor in mass numbers like that. And the care and attention we see in road building, it certainly suggests that they are not slaves. For absolutely not.
There's one reference from Tacitus, where he's describing the Battle of Mons Graupius, and he's putting the words of the a Caledonian leader whose name has gone completely out of my head. And that supposed speech which Tacitus makes up mentions the Romans forcing them to build their roads.
Yeah.
It's the one reference we have to the use of slaves in this country, and how accurate that is. Who the heck knows?
Yeah, I think more like it's hyperbole, and I think it might have happened in the requisition of material. So the hard stuff like the digging of stone or the extraction of clay, that could have been done. But I think the actual engineering and erection of these features, they were done by professionals. And I think using the word legionary as well, I think is unfair on auxilia as well. I think that auxiliaries mostly did most of the work. The legions were the special forces. You don't get the SAS building roads. you get the Royal Engineers, and I think a lot of the time it's very, very up in the air. But there is much more work being done recently on the role of auxiliaries, and I think they were done. But I do think as well, I think that the Romans, the legionaries, the army didn't build it. We say they're built by the army, but they're definitely surveyed by the army. They're definitely set out by the army, and they're definitely advised. But I think the workforce is paid. I think largely, I think they could pay the workforce to do it for them.
There could be
It's
a
a way
slight
of ingratiating yourself with the cultural model. Sorry, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, there could be a slight difference between public roads and local roads, via Vicinalis. It's the administration is slightly different, so it's quite possible that the who paid for what is certainly different. But anyway, that's another story, and we don't have time for it. But I'm writing a paper on exactly that in Lincolnshire. So everybody read Itinerary later this year when it comes out, because it'll all be there. Right.
I will.
Moving on. R. Anderson, I'm assuming that's Richard. What is the URL for the recordings? Can't tell you yet, Richard, because we've not put them up, and it won't be up for several days. But it will all be on the YouTube channel eventually. Chris Allen, who says he's going to see you at Brickstock Archaeological Group talk in 2 weeks' time. Great talk.
Okay, see you then, Chris. Thank you.
Oh, David Breer again wants to know if you're a member. I know the answer.
I'm not, am I?
No, you're not.
No, I am. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. But
No,
I
don't think
will
so.
be. I will be. I think. Can I be? Yes. Yeah, I will be.
Thanks for twisting his arm, David. Jan Scott, I have no questions because this was a tour de force. Please come again. Well,
Oh, that's kind. That's far too kind. Thank you.
Mark Willingdale. Exceptional detail of road construction. Hurrah for ditches. Naomi Caligaro. Is there any connection with Berkhamsted? I live in the former Ackerman Street in Berkhamsted. I don't think so.
I wouldn't be able to say for sure, but I doubt it. Other than that, all roads lead to Rome.
Well, there is that. What is happening to the site now? This is from Paul Brunsden. Will it be completely obliterated under the housing development?
Yeah, this is again, this is a question that I was expecting earlier, but it shows that I'm speaking to an audience that appreciates what we're doing first. It's gone. All of it has gone. It has all been removed. The mausoleum, the tileries, everything has gone. It's now under housing. Because that's the nature of our job. Development-led archaeology means that. And don't please, don't misunderstand. We can half cost them a lot of money to do it. But yeah, it's all been removed. It's all gone.
Yeah, which is very sad, but it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because if it wasn't for the development, we wouldn't even know it was there. So
archaeology is destruction.
Yeah, it is.
Ultimately.
It is. And
yeah, I think that's right. And I will be able to say actually to you that they are actually calling a lot of their street names and everything. These Romans will live on because they're calling a lot of their names for their streets and their avenues and everything else after what we found on the site. There's going to be a Pontentinus, I think, street or something else, and there's going to, hopefully they're going to name one.
Oh, that's excellent.
I hope so.
That's really good.
I've been on TV. I should be held back.
From Naomi again, Naomi Caligaro, regarding the maintenance or lack thereof of Roman roads after the Romans departed, how does Britain compare? Oh, you've done that one.
I've answered this one. Yeah, we've answered this one. That's good though.
We've done that. Sorry, Naomi. Dylan Matthews, how typical was the road construction in terms of layered materials used? There is a section of Roman road shown in Dorchester Museum, which seems to be quite different in its sectional appearance. He's assuming road construction techniques varied according to the materials, etc. at hand. Exactly.
That's you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it.
It's absolutely right. They use local materials wherever possible. Paddy mentioned the use of a quarry pit nearby the road. That's absolutely typical. Yep. You often get strings of them running up parallel to the road. Sometimes they even take the place of ditches. So yes, Dylan, absolutely right. Bob Hutchings, were any tile wasters used to remetal the road? Good question.
Not the main road, no, because it's too far. I think they had enough slag, I think, from the iron settlement around. I think they had enough of that. But the avenue, yes. The avenue, yeah, they used it for sure. They did a lot of remetalling.
Yeah, but that's again, it's evidence of using whatever materials they had to hand.
Precisely. I think that's exactly it. I think that
Yeah.
that falls into what you were saying. Yeah.
From David Breer again. Don't worry, he does this all the time.
That's okay.
There is evidence of late post-Roman maintenance of the bridge at Catterick.
Yeah.
And indeed there is.
Yes, there is.
That's
Yeah.
relevant.
Bridges were the one thing that would live on longer than anything else.
Yes. Yeah.
Bridges. Yeah. Bridges. It was in their interest to mend bridges as much as they possibly could, because they were really important. River crossings could mean the difference between getting there a week earlier.
Just quickly, David Rattler just come in. I can't show everybody this, unfortunately, but unless I shared my screen, he's given full route LiDAR image. I'll just see if I can get this up very quickly. No, it's not playing the game. I didn't think it would. I'll talk to you about that later, David.
Yeah.
Naomi Caligaro. Were there any springs or anything similar to cushion passengers sitting in wheeled conveyances? What a good question.
What a wonderful way of saying the question. Yeah, I didn't. Yes. Yeah, definitely. They didn't have any. The Roman vehicles. They weren't sprung suspension. They were probably like leaf springs, like I don't know, like a Ford Capri. They would have had some form of like cushioning. Absolutely, for sure. In fact, we find them a lot on Roman sites. You find little copper alloy pins or tacks, and they were for cushions. We find them a lot on trackways, because roads are extraordinary, but trackways were far more numerous because they are, they're just easy. They're just linear ways of getting around, and you find these a lot. So yeah, absolutely. We just don't. Our soil is not conducive to preserve organic material.
No.
But you read any source at all, and yeah, they certainly did. And they come on, they could build the Colosseum. I'm pretty sure they could cushion their derrieres on a car.
I think she was more asking about suspension actually on the vehicles.
Oh, well, I answered that in the first half. Yeah, I think so. I think there depends on the cart you're talking about. I think in Germany they found one,
Yes.
and it did have rudimentary suspension, didn't it? So yeah, absolutely, yeah. But I think the roads provided the comfort for the most part. That's why they didn't use. I mean, like, as these guys know, they didn't use. When you see these roads, you only ever see them in their bottom layer. Really, you only see the stones, and you think how uncomfortable that must have been. They did a lot to smooth the roads out as much as they possibly could. And there's loads of Roman writing about how uncomfortable road travel was. So yeah, I think they would have done, rudimentarily speaking. Yeah.
Robert sent me an email saying that's it, no more questions, and now there's 2 more emails. Very quickly, Paul Brunston, a quick follow-up. In a housing development in Cumbria, we were able to preserve a short length of Roman road under amenity open space in a housing development, although it was on a small scale. Yeah, it does happen in some developments, but it's not always feasible.
But we'd already cost them over £1 million, and by that time they were getting pretty knocked off with us. I think, yeah, it was a 300-meter length of road. At what bit do they save? Really, what bit do they do? Because we'd excavated the good bit, so you wouldn't have had it really. It's a real shame. My biggest thing, actually, I think that I wish they'd have done. I wish they'd have done more for the Tyleries, because the preservation on that was just breathtaking. It was astonishing.
Yes, it was.
And I wish that, and they did look into that, and it would have cost something in the region of, I think, something over £150,000 a year, just to keep it, standard, just to keep it stable.
Yes.
Because as soon as you dig something out, it dies. As soon as it gets exposed to air, it begins to fall apart. It's only preserved under the ground. So I wish we'd have done that, yeah. But without, like you said, Mike, without us digging this, without us doing it, we wouldn't have learned any of this. So it does help us to facilitate our methodology going forward about what to save and how to do it. I just want to tap this Philip thing. Philip, road built, and how do you know there was not a slave gang force employed? Why would there not be? You're exactly right. You are exactly right. That it's it's equally possible. But if this is a hill that you'd like to specifically die on, this is okay. Because there is no evidence that there isn't, but there's no evidence that there is. There are slave shackles, for example, found, and we do know slavery is a thing. But I think slavery, especially in the Roman period, slavery is not quite what we think it was. Most of our vision of slavery is from the 19th century idea of slavery, this awful kind of thing. I think in the Roman period, I'm not sure if, to be honest, I don't think the Romans, the army especially, trusted slaves to do anything that would be that big. But you're absolutely right. They certainly could have been. They certainly could have been. There's no evidence to suggest they weren't.
And that is it.
Could I ask a question?
Oh, is that Bev?
Yeah, I put in 2 texts, but they haven't worked. I'm no good at it. It's a very simple
you,
question.
Bev, go ahead.
Very simple. You mentioned Polden Hill brooches. Do you mean coming from the Polden Hills in Somerset?
No, there's another. It's a variant of. So what this is, it's a type of brooch that's called the Polden Hill. It's actually a Colchester derivative. It's a Polden Hill kind of, in a way, but no, Polden Hill around this area, actually, they're called that. And I don't actually know why they're called that, but they're called the Colchester derivative.
Okay. Another quick question. How many rebuild layers were there on the main road?
That's a good question. To be honest, I don't know.
You said 6 levels at one point.
Yeah, there's at least 6. But it's incredibly, as Mike will tell you, or anyone will tell you, they're incredibly hard to see. And actually, I would rather err on the side of caution and say that there are at least, rather than say this one is second, so this one's for real, this one's definite, because there will have been localized repairs all over the shop, and it's difficult to know. There were at least 2. There were at least 2 major. There was the first one when they built it, and then there was when the villa was occupied in the late 3rd century. It was done again with the metaling, the actual iron slag. They're the biggest ones. Before that, I wouldn't be able to say with any real confidence, and I don't think people ever really should, because we just don't know.
No.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike.
No, you're welcome, Bev. Bev struggles a bit with the technology, so we let him put.
Oh, that's absolutely fine. That's lovely. No, that's no worries at all. No worries.
Now, you've been talking now for 2 hours and 10 minutes, and we've still got 83 people with us. So that tells you.
Well,
how
thank you very much. Thank you. That's really kind.
That's quite fantastic. I think we'd better let Paddy have a long drink now of something, probably in a bottle. I'm certainly going to drink. So it just remains for me to thank Paddy again for an excellent talk, an excellent Q&A. And there was a request for you to come back again, and you did sort of hint at that at one stage, to talk about a different area.
I'm always available to talk about the Romans any day.
Right. Well, we'll probably take you up on that, but it's not just my decision, but I'm sure we will. So with that, I'm going to wish everybody a good night.